Boris Johnson has been moved into the ICU in hospital, so into the intensive care unit. I'm going to read out the number 10 statement. Since Sunday evening, the Prime Minister has been under the care of doctors at St Thomas's Hospital in London after being admitted with persistent symptoms of coronavirus. Over the course of this afternoon, the condition of the Prime Minister has worsened, and on the advice of his medical team, he has been moved to the intensive care unit at the hospital. The PM has asked Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab, who is the first Secretary of State, to deputise for him where necessary. The PM is receiving excellent care and thanks all NHS staff for their hard work and dedication. And the PMs, this is not in their statement, but also brief, the PM is understood to be conscious and was moved an hour and a half ago as a precaution in case he needs ventilation. I should probably go to you first, Lara, as a doctor. How should we interpret this? Does this mean it's necessarily, very serious, or could this? How much do you accept that this would be a precautionary measure?
So I think it could be. I think what they know about coronavirus patients now is that they can deteriorate quite rapidly. Obviously, you saw the Prime Minister clapping on the streets, and then now he's in hospital and ICU. So that's a bit, if he's conscious, that means he's probably not being ventilated yet. If people's oxygen requirements are going up quite high, then they tend to take them to ICU to preempt the deterioration so they can best support them. But obviously we know people are going to the ICU and coming out and recovering. So they might be taking extra precautions based on that. I'm sure he's getting very close monitoring. But yeah, it must be very scary, having seen patients on ICU, you've got to have a whole human side to it, really. It's not a nice place to be. It's a very intense place to be, one-on-one sort of nursing, and obviously he's got a pregnant partner, so it's a bit very, very kind of shocking news. But now Dominic Raab's in charge. Great.
What does it mean? Maybe you could explain sort of to our audience what it means to be moved into ICU, because there's a lot of terms that we've sort of instantly become, comfortable just say, oh, they're in ICU. Oh, it's a vent. Everyone's learnt the lingo, which is that there's an intensive care unit, which is where you go when it's serious, and there's a ventilator, which is what you might need if it's serious. But I think there's potentially stages of care in intensive care unit, and what practically happens that at least I'm not particularly clear about. So if what would be happening to someone who's just been sent to ICU?
So in normal cases, I think ICU is normally if one or two of your organs need support. So whether that's your heart needs support through giving adrenaline, or your lungs through ventilation, or your kidneys through renal replacement therapy. In terms of coronavirus patients, it's preempting, I guess, the deterioration and then needing to be on a ventilator. And in obviously serious cases, then it can lead to multi-organ failure. So they can support your other organs there. ICU or ITU, it's the same thing, I think. I am very wary. I'm a very junior doctor at this stage. And basically it's one-to-one nursing care. You're getting all your observations done, every 15 minutes or every hour. So they can monitor you for deterioration, and you have the healthcare staff close, whereas you can't have that on a ward. You're not going to necessarily see staff that quickly. So that's basically it.
Aaron, I suppose it's fairly unprecedented in the middle of a national crisis where the government has more decisions to make than ever. I don't really like it when Laura Kuenssberg is on the TV saying this is unprecedented and the government are having to make unprecedented decisions, and sort of poses that as political analysis. But it is sort of undeniable that the government are under intense pressure at this point. So it is quite unprecedented in a moment like that for a leader to be taken out of action and be in intensive care, or is it not?
No, it's not. Churchill had pneumonia twice during the Second World War.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
I mean, look, FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, couldn't use his legs for most of his full terms as US president. I'm trying to think of more recently in Britain. Who was it? Wasn't Macmillan? It was Anthony Eden was very sick, but then he was also a terrible prime minister. So yeah, there are a few examples.
I thought JFK was supposed to have a sort of delusional fever when the Bay of Pigs was launched, and that was sort of one of the explanations as to why it was a flop. Yeah,
I mean that's one thing. I mean, but in terms of a decent comparison to this, yes, we were at war in the Second World War. Churchill had pneumonia twice, which may be what Boris Johnson has right now. And yeah, it's obviously best wishes to him. Hope he recovers quickly. But what's interesting is the line that was coming out of Downing Street yesterday was, it's totally normal. It's just a checkup. Right now, hospital beds are gold dust, right? Unless it's absolutely urgent, people aren't going to hospital. So for the Prime Minister to be going to hospital indicated it was very serious. Oh, he's just staying in for tests, etc. Given capacity in the NHS is stretched right now, that was completely counterintuitive. And so my suspicions were that was just nonsense, and that actually was probably in a bit of trouble. If you follow Lewis Goodall on Twitter, great journalist at BBC Newsnight, he's a healthy skeptic. You know, he's not a conspiracy theorist, and he was kind of insinuating the same thing. And it's troubling that the media and 10 Downing Street wouldn't even be relaying accurate information about the Prime Minister's health. You know, they were saying until a few hours ago, he's leading the government. Now he's in ICU. Now, I'm not saying this to make sort of political capital out of it, but it does reveal a certain modus operandi with regards to relaying information to the general public in the context of the coronavirus pandemic, which often isn't particularly truthful. And that's concerning because people need to be in receipt of the facts. The worse this gets and the longer it goes on.
There's a particularly, I suppose, strange element to, I mean, we often talk about how the media isn't as critical as it needs to be in ordinary times, but there is something about coronavirus which has sort of put the media into national emergency mode, as you know they would in a war, which again we'd be incredibly critical of, where it seems like they do especially feel their role as one of reassuring the public and getting the messages across that the government wants to get across, and they even more explicitly than usual sort of see themselves as one arm of governance, as opposed to, you know, the fifth estate that's meant to hold power to account. They've now become a sort of lever for crowd management, as it were. I suppose we should talk quickly about, you know, Raab is deputising for Boris Johnson. So at this point, he is, you know, he's standing in as Prime Minister. I'm somewhat dubious if that makes him actually the most powerful person in Downing Street at the moment. I feel like he's not necessarily going to be the one who now makes the final decision, as it were. It doesn't seem like he's been the most influential person during this coronavirus crisis. He gave the press briefing today, you know, the 5 p.m. one, and I have to say he seemed very awkward to me. It didn't seem like he was particularly confident, sort of, and on top of his brief when it came to coronavirus. So I'm not really sure how that will play out. Any big thoughts on Raab taking over for a while?
He's so right wing, isn't he?
He is very right wing.
That's my only thought. He's written quite a lot of, you know, libertarian-y stuff.
He's kind of, yeah, he's a Randian. He's like Sajid Javid. You know, his whole ideology is the productive side of the economy is the private sector.
Yeah.
The extractive side, the useless parasitic side of the economy is basically all the jobs right now that are keeping society ticking over. You know, refuse collection, hospital workers, etc. The upside down, topsy-turvy economy that we have, where the most important people get paid the least, is kind of, you know, the right-wing libertarian utopia that people like Dominic Raab sort of really aspire for this country to live up to. You know, he was one of the people involved in the Britannia Unchained book, and that is his politics.